My Lords, the hybrid sitting in the House will now resume. A private notice question on deaths in the English Channel. Lord McConnell of Glenscorrodale.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the private notice question standing in my name on the order paper.
Lord Parkinson.
My Lords, this tragic event highlights the grave dangers of channel crossings and the pressing need to stop the callous criminals who are exploiting vulnerable people. The UK has a proud history of granting protection to those who need it, but it is an established principle that people should claim asylum in the first safe country that they enter. We continue to work closely with our neighbours to discourage people from making these dangerous and unnecessary journeys.
Lord McConnell.
My Lords, I have 4 grandchildren under the age of 10, and I cannot imagine being in a situation where I am so scared of what might happen to them on land that I put them in an unsafe boat to cross the English Channel. And yet this week, Rasool Iran Najad, Shiva Mohammed Panahi, put their 3 children, Anita aged 9, Armin aged 6 and Artin aged 15 months, in a boat. 2 of the children are dead along with their parents and 1 other is still missing. My Lords, surely in this day and age, with 2 countries that are the 5th and 7th largest economies in the world, with some of the most professional armed forces and diplomatic service in the world, with a history of public service administration that the UK and France has, surely we can find a way of coming together with the International Organisation for Migration and the UNHCR to find a safe route for families fleeing persecution to come to France and this country and have their applications determined in a safe and legal manner. Yeah.
Well, the noble Lord will, I hope, appreciate that because there is an ongoing investigation, I'm unable to go into as much detail on the names and identities and indeed ages of the people that he mentions, but I've seen the same reports, as I'm sure we all are, and the details of those are heart-wrenching indeed. This tragic case underlines the importance of breaking the criminal business model, which is exploiting the desperation of vulnerable people, as he says, people who are in fear and very desperate. We're working very closely with the French. Our National Crime Agency is assisting the French authorities in their investigation. As you'll know, the Home Secretary appointed a former Royal Marine, Dan O'Mahony, as the clandestine Channel Threat Commander to tackle the problem there. But he's also right that we need to have safe methods for people to claim asylum without making that journey, and that's why our vulnerable people relocation scheme works with just the organisations that he mentions to try and make sure that people don't undertake these perilous journeys.
Lord Dobbs.
As an agreement with the EU on family reunion is unlikely to be reached by the end of December, will the government, as a matter of urgency, seek the cooperation of the French authorities to identify people, especially children, who are eligible for family reunion or who have other connections with the UK in order to expedite their safe passage to this country and to avoid another tragedy?
Well, the noble Lord is a respected and tenacious campaigner on these issues. I know he has an amendment to the immigration bill, which the other place will have the opportunity of examining when it's before them next week. I would say, tragically in this case, this incident happened while we still have the Dublin regulations, so it's important to make the distinction between those regulations and the actions that we must all undertake to deter people from making these dangerous journeys. Nobody should be crossing the Channel in this dangerous way.
Lord Paddock.
My Lords, if there is a so-called pull factor that is resulting in desperate families dying in the Channel, it's the fact that many of those who make the crossing are given asylum in the UK because they are genuine asylum seekers. But the only way they can find out if their claim will be accepted once they're on the European mainland is if they make the crossing. So why doesn't the government now not allow applications from those on the European mainland, and if they don't qualify, tell them unequivocally that they will be deported if they make the crossing? Surely letting them know what will happen to them before they make the perilous crossing is the decent and humane thing to do.
Well, my lords, we want to deter people from undertaking dangerous journeys at every stage, whether that's across the Channel or further upstream. We've seen terrible cases in the Mediterranean too. That's why our Vulnerable People Resettlement Scheme is working directly in affected areas so that people don't need to travel across the world, putting themselves and their families at danger, but can apply and we can take people and give them the protection they need directly from source rather than after they've endangered themselves.
The Lord Bishop of Bristol.
My lords, as we have already heard, the deaths of anyone trying to reach the UK in search of safety is tragic, and the tragedy is multiplied when it's the death of a family. Save the Children are absolutely right to say the English Channel must not become a graveyard for children. With that in mind, can the Minister give this House an update on the resumption of the refugee resettlement programme, which was suspended in March?
Well, the Right Reverend Prelate is right. This is a particularly heart-wrenching case. She's right. The resettlement scheme, because of the COVID pandemic, was put on pause in March. But as per their statement in June, the International Organization for Migration and the UNHCR are beginning to resume some of their functions, but with limited capacity. The UK's visa application centres are also beginning to resume some of their functions, again with limited capacity, and the same applies for the Home Office teams who are processing applications. We hope that we can help people as swiftly as possible.
Lord Green of Teddington.
My Lords, does the noble Lord the Minister agree with me that any attempt to process asylum applications abroad would be rapidly overwhelmed by a huge number of claimants? Indeed, failed applicants might well head for Calais, thus making a very bad situation even worse. So may I ask whether the government has considered joint maritime border controls with powers to return migrants to their point of departure?
Well, I do agree with the noble lord that we want to deter people from travelling to the European continent and making dangerous journeys, whether that's by land or by sea. Dan Omani is in France today, meeting the French authorities and continuing the already deep engagement that we have with them to try and tackle this problem in the Channel. Lord
Rosser.
Yes, my lords, last week the government voted against both free school meals for hungry children in the UK and a legal route to safety for refugee children. Why is it vulnerable children that pay the price for this government's policies? And 2 days ago, the Home Secretary was quoted as saying, and I quote, "I am doing everything I can to stop callous criminals exploiting vulnerable people," close quote. If the Home Secretary votes again next week to slam shut the only safe and legal route for vulnerable children to reach the UK, how can she possibly make that claim?
Well, I'm sorry to hear some of the points that the noble Lord raises. What the government wants to do is to create safe and legal routes so that vulnerable people, including vulnerable children, are not being put at risk by making dangerous crossings of the Channel in this way. That's why our Vulnerable People Resettlement Scheme has helped people, including children, nearly 20,000 over the last 5 years, and we've seen over 29,000 family reunion visas issued in the last 5 years as well. So we are doing what we can to help vulnerable children.
Lord de Larkiat.
My lords, the shocking event at Dunkirk must shame us all, particularly those who fail to accept that the pressure of migration has been with us for a very long time. It applies to rich as well as poor countries. We need a safe and secure method that the Minister has described. What I want to ask is, what is the status of the Dublin III agreement rules, particularly now that we are in negotiation with European countries, particularly the discussions are going on? And may I ask what happens to the country, including Britain, if we fail to take our quota of migrants?
Well, the noble lord will, I'm sure, understand I can't comment on the negotiations with the EU which are ongoing. But as I said to the noble lord, Lord Dubbs, the Dublin 3 regulation in this instance sadly wouldn't have made this tragic event this week happened while the regulation is in place. The problem here is the criminal gangs who are taking people's life savings and setting them out to sea in unseaworthy vessels without a care for what happens to them, and those are the people that we must focus on relentlessly.
Lord Malsford.
My Lords, whilst HMG must retain the right to allow, indeed facilitate, the entry of any individual into the UK, following the point made by the noble Lord Green, can my noble friend confirm that the government will not seek to move out of the UK the process of assessing asylum claims of those who have not yet entered the UK? Because to do so, even if it started only in France, it would rapidly result in an unmanageable number of claimants from all over the world.
I agree with my noble friend. To do so would increase the risks and increase the encouragement to people to make dangerous journeys. That is why our efforts are focused on schemes like the Vulnerable People Resettlement Scheme, which takes people directly from affected areas and gives protection to those who need it most.
Lord Kerr of Kinlochard.
The Minister keeps referring to the Vulnerable People Resettlement Scheme, but the fact is that we have no official resettlement scheme currently open, and it's the absence of a safe official route which drives these poor people into these terrible dangers. Will the Minister please give a straight answer to the question which the Bishop asked? When will our resettlement schemes reopen? Others have reopened theirs. And will the government ask the French and Belgian authorities to permit UK staff to process family reunion cases and asylum applications in the ports, in the camps where these poor people currently are?
Well, my lords, I'm afraid I can't give a simple answer to that question because it, as the noble lord I'm sure will appreciate, depends on the COVID-19 pandemic. But as I said to the Right Reverend Prelate, whilst some of the functions are beginning again as much as we are able to in light of the pandemic, and that is the best way to help vulnerable people without encouraging them to make dangerous journeys and fall prey to the sorts of callous criminal gangs that are behind so many of the deaths in the Channel.
Lord MP.
Will my noble friend explain to the House how these blackguards of people smugglers are allowed to ply their evil trade in broad daylight on French soil and in French waters? Can he assure the House that there is not a political dimension to this crisis by allowing this trade to continue on French soil and on French waters?
Well, my lords, no, we're working very closely with the French government and French authorities to tackle these callous criminals, and I can tell the noble lord that last year there were 418 arrests and 203 convictions, which resulted in combined sentences of over 430 years. So we and the French take this problem very seriously and are determined to pursue the criminals who are endangering the lives of vulnerable people.
Lord Weston Spithead.
My lords, the desperation of these people is palpable, as shown by the Nigerians who took over a tanker in the Channel only very recently, and one should say the operation to recover that was very well executed, a textbook case. I was surprised there was no statement in the House, as we were taking over a foreign ship in international waters, but still, that's what we clearly do nowadays. We don't worry about that. As a seaman, I can tell the House that I've been one for 50 years. I can tell the House people will die in the Channel if they keep coming in these little inflatables. What worries me is people will have seen that taking over a merchant ship or a ferry is not difficult. And I hope that we are looking carefully at this. I could certainly take over a ferry in Calais with 5 people with no problem at all. And that is a real worry. And could I ask the Noble Lord the Minister, is this being looked at? Are we taking precautions to make sure this doesn't happen? The risks would be huge if that sort of thing happened.
Well, the Noble Lord gives me the opportunity to thank the police and the armed forces for their quick and decisive action at the weekend, which was very important indeed. He's right to raise the fact that as the weather worsens over the autumn and the winter, then these crossings, which are dangerous already, will only get more perilous. And yes, I can say the Home Office is working with the French authorities to look at all of the different routes that people pursue, through the Channel Tunnel, through ferries and other means. This is not a dangerous, this is not a safe route. All of these routes are dangerous to pursue, and we don't want to see anybody risking their lives in this way.
Baroness Butler-Schloss.
I declare my interest on the register. Following the question of Lord Dobbs, I'd ask the Home Office to take practical steps to identify and bring to England Dublin 3 right to join families of the unaccompanied minors who are in Calais and Dunkirk, to save them taking perilous journeys.
I'm afraid I didn't quite catch the end of the Noble and Learned Lady's question, so if she'll forgive me, I'll consult Hansard and write to her if I've missed anything. But on the Dublin regulation, I can say that over the last 4 years, the UK has consistently reunited the second largest number of family-linked cases after Germany over the last 4 years, so we take our responsibilities seriously.
My Lords, the time allowed for this private notice question has elapsed. We now come to a second private notice question on intensive care triaging guidelines. Do you want to change? Baroness Falkner of Margravine.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the private notice question standing in my name.
Minister.
My Lords, claims that frail and elderly patients were denied care in wave 1 of the coronavirus pandemic, in part because of a triage tool which was developed by the NHS in case it was overwhelmed, are categorically untrue. Government is ultimately responsible for national policy on public access to NHS services. However, decisions on who will benefit from care are made as part of normal clinical decision-making by clinicians. Guidance to help clinicians make rational, evidence-based decisions in the event of ICUs being overwhelmed was commissioned, but was halted when it became clear the NHS would not be overwhelmed.
Baroness Falkner.
My Lords, I think the whole House will be grateful to the Minister for his unequivocal rebuttal of that extremely concerning story. Let me be clear that this question isn't intended to criticise the NHS, for whom we all have the highest regard. However, according to that Sunday Times story, under conditions of extreme stress, guidance was considered that could have amounted to age discrimination. Does he agree with me for the need for the NHS to uphold its private sector equality duty? And will he provide reassurance that these triage tools should not be used to prioritise patients on any basis other than clinical need, either this winter or going forward as routine?
My Lords, I'm grateful for the opportunity offered by the Noble Baroness to reinforce the point. Age discrimination is absolutely forbidden by the NHS Charter, by the Constitution. The CMO wrote to NHS Trust on 3 occasions to reiterate this point, and I will quote from the letter published on the 7th of April. The key principle is that each person is an individual whose needs and preferences must be taken account of individually. By contrast, blanket policies are inappropriate, whether due to medical condition, disability or age.
Baroness Andrews.
My Lords, it is indeed a very reassuring response from the Minister, but does he agree that very many elderly people will have been very worried by the Sunday Times report, and they will welcome the assurances that have just been given by the NHS and the professional bodies that triage was never intended or used as a strategy for implementation. But we have to be mindful of the fact that as the pandemic is accelerating, fears are rising. And therefore, it's vitally important to get this message out as loudly as possible, just as the NHS did in April, when they said at the start of the epidemic that far from rationing ICU care, all patients should be treated respectfully and equally and receive the best possible care. So can the Minister say now what the government itself is going to do to support the NHS to reassure every potential patient, irrespective of their age?
Well, my lords, we go into the second wave in much better shape regarding coronavirus because we know so much more about the virus. And in terms of the medicines, the therapeutics, the practices, the training, the configuration of our wards, the building of the Nightingales, there is a huge amount of skill, learning and capacity in the NHS to ensure that everyone has the opportunity for the best possible care. Can I also use the opportunity to remind noble lords that these claims not only worry patients, they are deeply offensive to NHS doctors, nurses and therapists who have cared for more than 100,000 COVID patients to date in hospital settings and are committed to providing the best possible care in a second wave.
Baroness Barker.
My Lords, triage is a necessary part of emergency medicine and it will continue to be. Could the Noble Lord the Minister say what has been learnt in emergency departments in areas that have been in lockdown, such as Leicester, Bolton and Oldham, and what learning has there been from those areas that can be sent to other areas to inform what will continue to be a necessary practice of part of good medicine?
Well, my lords, our learning has come a long way. Practices within ICU units have changed as a result of what we've learned in terms of the way in which oxygen is administered, the range of drugs that are available, the turning of patients. But to date, triage hasn't been necessary because the NHS is so good at load management that patients can be dispersed and deployed through the system, and it hasn't been placed under pressure, and it's our expectation that we're in good shape for the second wave. But the principle remains, as the National Medical Director, Stephen Powers, stated in his letter of April the 7th, the key principle is that each and every person is an individual whose needs and preferences must be taken account of individually, and that remains our principle.
Lord Lansley.
On precisely the point that my noble friend the Minister has just made, can I ask him, I know he will be aware of the revised version of RESPECT, that is the recommended summary plan for emergency care and treatment, which was published in September this year by the Resuscitation Council UK. It is in wide but rather variable use. Can my noble friend say that he will encourage NHS England to make its use a best practice requirement in relation to COVID-19 patients entering high dependency or intensive care in the months ahead?
Well, my lords, we are extremely grateful to the Resuscitation Council for its work on this important tool. It gives an opportunity for patients to express their preference and for clinical judgment to be used at moments of acute intervention. It is being used in some places, but as the Noble Lord rightly points out, its use is variable, and I'd be glad to take this back to the Department and see what can be done to encourage its use more thoroughly.
Lord Bill Moyer.
My Lords, at the University Hospitals Birmingham, and I'm Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, professors there said there was no way any triage tool was used. And if anything, better intensive care treatment was given during the crisis. So I'm glad the Noble Lord the Minister very categorically said that. The Sunday Times article was trying to insinuate that people were not getting the intensive care if they needed it. Could he reassure the House that in this second wave, the Nightingale hospitals that were built at such brilliant speed will be used if needed and are ready for use?
My Lords, I completely agree with those at the University of Birmingham who confirmed that triage tools were not used, they were not necessary, and everyone had absolutely the best care that could have possibly been given to them. The Nightingale hospitals are on standby where necessary. They will be deployed if needed, but it is my hope and aspiration that they will not come into play.
Lord Collins.
Vital to sustain the trust of older people, and therefore does the Noble Lord the Minister agree that it's now vital for the NHS to follow through on the commitments it made to improve services for older people living at home and in care homes set out in last year's NHS long-term plan? What is the government doing to make sure that happens?
Well, my Lord, the implementation of the long-term plan is something that is underway despite COVID, and we have put the care of the elderly and, in fact, all those who are vulnerable and are in need of social care, half of whom, by the way, are under the age of 60, at the centre of our efforts. But if I may return to the point of the question and to the article, can I just remind Noble Lords that 2/3 of our COVID inpatients were over the age of 65. Each of them got the support and treatment that they deserved and needed, and that will remain our commitment during any second wave.
Lord Scriven.
My Lords, NHS England issued on the 10th of April the reference guide for emergency medicine, and non-conveyancing guidelines for ambulance services stated any care home resident should not be taken to hospital until discussed with a clinical advisor. So why, my Lords, was a resident in a care home not given equal treatment and access to hospital as an equivalent person outside of a care home setting, and has that instruction been withdrawn?
Well, my Lords, I don't know about whether the specific instruction has been withdrawn or not, and I'd be glad to write to the Noble Lord on that. But can I just reassure him that during an epidemic of a highly contagious disease, a hospital may not be the safest place for someone who is ill in a care home, nor will it necessarily be the safest place for someone who has gone to their GP and is sitting in the GP's surgery. It is therefore absolutely essential that clinical risk management and advice is sought before referral to a hospital. No prejudice, no unfairness is at stake here. This is simply good clinical practice.
Lord Balfe.
My Lords, Sunday Times has form on inaccurate stories, as does the Telegraph. Indeed, I asked the Minister a question on the 21st of September about a Telegraph story about age restrictions, and he assured me that there was none. But secondly, and I quote, I asked him, will he agree to place a copy of all the circulars from DHSC in the library so that we can see what's going on? In reply, he said, I'll inquire as to what we can possibly share so that these decisions are as transparent as my noble friend wishes. I do think it would help to keep the papers on the right track if there was more put into the library. Could the Minister tell me how he's getting on with his endeavours to get this information into the public domain?
Well, my noble friend is entirely right to chase me in this matter. I remember the commitment very well, and I will endeavour to find out from my colleagues at the department on how they're doing in getting those important papers in the library.
Lord Hunt of King's Heath.
The Minister was very forthright today in rejecting the Sunday Times story, and a month ago he was very forthright to in an answer to Lord Balfe about blanket DNR notices. My Lords, does he think, picking up on Lord Balfe's question, that there may be an issue of communication with staff working at the front line where impressions are given which are not in accord with official government policy? And I just wondered, in the light of all this, whether he's given some thought to the way in which communications with staff of the NHS might be improved in order to deal with these very troubling issues.
Well, my Lords, I'm not sure if I agree with the implications of the Noble Lord's question. The implication being that somehow there is a prejudice on the front line against older people, and that somehow staff at the front line take it into their own hands to make decisions that are in themselves inherently unfair. That isn't my experience. Where the Noble Lord absolutely has a point is that people are extremely sensitive about these kinds of issues, and quite rightly are deeply concerned that they are going to get the treatment and care that they deserved, and that they won't be subject to any form of unfairness. And it is absolutely imperative that the NHS builds trust and conveys a strong communication on these issues. But to push back against the noble lord, it is not my impression that the staff at the NHS have lost sight of this important principle.
Baroness Susan.
My Lords, I declare an interest in that the many members of my family and friends work in the front line of NHS, and I do so love and respect as all other members do. At the height of the pandemic, my Lords, I watched a program on Italian and American doctors using algorithms for vital decisions on treatment, with one being highlighted where triage tools had been indicated nil chances of patients surviving. However, family pleading with the doctors convince them to give them a few more days to see if, quote, miracle can happen. My Lords, in April, my close friends whose death was predicted from use of some kind of triage early process. Sadly, my friend lost his battles. However, the miracle did occur against all odds because of one decision of one team of doctors meant Italian patients survived, given the fiasco or use of algorithms. And I do welcome the Minister's absolute assurance. What analysis of serious case review has been undertaken of the numbers of treatment decisions based on any triage tools, given the extreme pressures on the doctors have returned? Can the noble lord, the Minister, say where deaths occurred, what proportions of these were individuals from Bangladeshi heritage, and if any lessons can be learned to improve their survival chances in the current emergency?
Well, my Lords, I would like to share my sympathies with the noble Baroness for the loss of her friend, for which we're all very sad. But I do take exception to her implication about the fiasco in the use of algorithms, and I don't accept the implication that it is regular practice for clinicians to somehow give up on patients who do stand a chance simply because their reading of an algorithm says that they should move on to someone else. That isn't how we run the NHS. It's not how we had to run it during the first wave, and it's not how we intend to run it during the second wave.
My Lords, all supplementary questions have been asked, and both private notice questions have also been finished.